Hi guys! So today I want to start off by telling you guys a story about something that happened to me a couple of years ago. And what happened was I was interviewing for this company for a test engineering position, and I was really nervous about the interview. So I'm in the interview and everything is going pretty well, I think, and I'm answering all the questions correctly. And then at the end, the interviewer asked me if I had any questions, and I asked him about the staging environment that they used and about their software development lifecycle and which team is responsible for maintaining all of their environments. And he stopped me and he said that they don't have a staging environment, they test in production. What? I was so confused. I thought, like, was this a trick question? Am I supposed to answer this in some way? The interviewer could see that I was confused, so he asked me to do something that I want all of you to do right now. So think about the last feature that your team deployed. Is it working right now in production? How do you know? Your users haven't reported anything to you, your alarms haven't gone off, so you assume that it works, but you don't know. Testing in production is the only way to know that your features are working in production right now. So what is it? Testing in production means testing your features in the environment where your features will live. So it means not using a dummy environment like staging or QA or a test environment. You're using production because that's the environment where your features will live. And it's not a replacement for all testing, and it's not the end of the world. So hi guys, I'm Talia. I'm a dev advocate at Split. This is my Twitter handle, and just a little bit about me. I am passionate about Chipotle, and I'm passionate about breaking my features prior to launch, and also I'm passionate about testing my coworkers. So what do I mean by testing my coworkers? I test their reactions to things that I think are funny. This one was especially fun because I'm a Warriors fan, and the guy who did this was a Cavs fan when LeBron was still on the Cavs. Okay, so after the interview, I went home and I did my homework. Why haven't I ever heard about testing in production? And if it's so great, why aren't more companies using it? So most companies, and all the companies that I had worked for before this one, they had all used a test environment or a staging environment. And what I came to realize is that staging environments are really not the way to go about testing your software, and there's a bunch of reasons why, and let's go through them. The first is that staging environments are expensive to maintain. So if you just take into account the basic website architecture of web servers sitting in front of a number of application servers that query a database plus a memory-based cache, you're looking at over $100,000 per year, and that's not including infrastructure costs, software licenses, support, and these add up. So if you have 4, 5, 6 staging environments, you could easily hit $1 million a year for your company just because of these dummy environments. Staging test results do not always match production test results. So imagine you're testing a feature in staging and you worked so hard on testing every single requirement. You worked with the product owner and all the developers, and you went through each requirement. You know that this is working perfectly in staging. So you sign off on the feature and you release to production, and what happens? There's a bug. So these environments are different, plain and simple. Production includes data that staging doesn't have, and you're never going to know the difference between these two environments until you test in production. No one cares if staging is broken, so picture this. You are testing a high priority fix for a feature, and you log into staging to test it, but staging is down. You get the 404 screen of death, so you ping the DevOps guy who's in charge, but he tells you need to open a ticket. So you open a ticket, but it needs to get escalated by your manager, but your manager's not there, and all you need to do is test this thing in staging, and no one cares. Like, no one's going to get a call in the middle of Thanksgiving dinner if staging is down. No one cares. The load in staging does not match production. So when you think of the number of people who use your staging environment and the number of people who use your production environment, these numbers are really different. So the accuracy of speed and lag times is not going to be correct. And at the end of the day, I've never heard anyone speak highly of their staging environment. But I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking, Talia, that's nice. You know, testing and production works for some companies, but, you know, it's just not for me. But what's the first thing that you do right after you deploy a feature? You go to production and you test it. Gotcha. Okay, so some more things I learned while studying about testing and production is that testing and production only works when the whole team owns product quality. So contrary to popular belief, it's not just the test engineer's job or just the QA engineer's job to ensure the quality of the product. This responsibility should be with the entire team. It also only works when you test early and often, because the earlier you start testing, the earlier you'll find bugs and defects, and the earlier you'll provide a better user experience for your users. It also only works when you trust your team and your product. So think about that. Companies don't test in production because of this fear and lack of trust in their systems, and for the same reason, they refuse to invest in the tools and process changes that will generate that trust. But I know that it's risky. I know that it can affect real end users, and it can affect reporting and business decisions, and it can affect third parties that your software is integrated with. But we're going to go through how to do this safely, and we're going to address all these risks and set it up together. So, how do you test in production? There's 4 steps. The first step is to install the necessary tools. So the first tool that you need is a feature flagging tool. And feature flagging is a way to decide who sees which features. It's used to hide, enable, or disable your features at runtime. So this is kind of what I picture feature flagging looking like in my head. So what we have here is our developers would create a feature flag from the UI, which I'll show you in a minute, and then target all of our internal teammates. So our developers, our testers, our product design, and then anything related to the feature can only be seen by the users that are inside of the feature flag, because the default for the flag is off right now. So all these people on the right, the end users, they can't see anything related to the feature. So if there's any bugs or anything is wrong with the feature, it has no impact on your user base because they're not targeted in the feature flag. They don't see the feature. So while the feature flag is off, you're going to go in and you're going to test everything and verify all of the requirements. You're going to fix all the bugs while the flag is off in production. And then when you turn the feature flag on, your users are happy and they're dancing because they have a perfect feature. And when this happens, you already know that your feature is working in production, so there really are no surprises. And then you repeat this process for every new feature. So every feature has its own feature flag. And then when you're testing in parallel with feature flags, it can be overwhelming when you have a lot of flags and you don't know which combination to test. The best thing to do is work with your product owner to prioritize what the most important flows are, and then choose those flows, add your automation bots inside of those feature flags, and then once you run your automation script, you have a set of feature flag combinations that are important for you to test. And then after you feel comfortable and you know that the release went out successfully, it's really important that you delete the flag. And then after you delete the flag in the UI, you should delete it in the code too, because you don't want stale code in your code base. I have another video on feature flag maintenance and best practices. You're welcome to go look that up, where I go into a ton more detail. So I'm going to walk you through how to do this in the UI. So this is what it looks like in the split UI. You're just going to click on create a split, which is another name for create a feature flag. You're going to want to choose a name that is depictive of what your feature is doing. Then you're going to go into traffic type, and select your traffic type. Now, traffic type differentiates the people who see your feature and the people who don't. So you can differentiate this by device, location, user, whatever you decide. And then once you create the flag, you can set up your targeting rules. And your targeting rules are again what differentiates the people who see your feature and the people who don't see your feature. So notice one thing here, that I'm also adding a test user inside of my feature flag, and this is for automation purposes so that I can have this bot inside of my automation tests, and I'll show you that in a second. So here all I'm saying is that if you're in this list of users, you can see the feature, and if you're not on this list, then you don't see the feature. So this is what it looks like in the code. I'm going to say if the user is in the flag, you're going to give them treatment on, and if you're not in this flag, I'm going to give you the existing treatment. And then in the test, I'm going to log in as this robot. I'm going to go to this specific page, do some specific actions, and then I'm going to expect really cool feature to work. And that's it. So the cherry on top of the cake here is really that when we turn on the feature flag in production, we already know that the feature is working. So there really are no surprises, and that's really important. Okay, so the next tool you need after a feature flagging framework is an automation framework. You want to choose an automation framework that's easy to adopt, easy to debug, one that has really good reporting, and one that has a really good support community. You need an automation framework because it's just not scalable to test everything manually, especially when you're testing in production. The next tool that you need is a job scheduler. So you need a job scheduler that's going to run your tests for you. This can be a simple cron job or through something like Jenkins or Travis. I'll go through my recommendations also. So a question that I get all the time is why not just run the tests in a loop? And I have two answers for that. One is that it's overkill. You could set up the tests to run in your build pipeline or incrementally, but to have them just running nonstop is really just overkill. And then you also just want to trust your tests. So you want to run them 10, 20 times in production and watch them pass and build your confidence. And this is something that I like to do to build my confidence before I push up a test. Okay, another thing that's really important is to have a really good alerting tool. You want to choose an alerting tool that can be integrated with your job scheduler. So once a test fails, you get alerted and you know what to do. It's also important that everyone on your team, from product to design to engineering, that everyone is on call. Why? Again, because everyone owns product quality. So these are some of the tools that I recommend for feature flagging, Split obviously, and then I've also used LaunchDarkly. And then for my automation frameworks, my absolute favorite automation framework is Robot. I've also used Puppeteer. It's not the most user-friendly. Puppeteer with Jest. Angular. For Angular applications, I've used Protractor. That's great. For my job schedulers, there's Jenkins, CircleCI, Travis. Like, they're all the same for me. For alerting, PagerDuty and Slack work really well. Okay, so after you install all of your necessary tools, the next step is to carefully create your test data. So the problem when we're creating test data in production is that you need a way to create and manipulate test data in production without affecting real end users or any data or analytics, right? So something that we did was we created a consistent naming convention for all of our users, and that looked like this. It was a Boolean, and it said the name of the Boolean was isTestUser, and if it was set to true, then we would know that this is a test user in production. And these users looked like real users and they acted like real users, but they're actually robots. So if the flag was on, we know that this object or this page is a testing entity. And this goes for our back-end flagging system as well. So in our front end, we had these test users that were marked as test users with this Boolean equal to true. And then in our back end, we had a back-end flagging system to identify these testing entities. So if the flag was on, we know that this page or this object or this thing in production should not be included in any data and analytics. and so we would exclude them from, Datadog or Looker or whatever you're using to collect your data. So in your automation scripts, you make sure that your test entities only interact with each other. So you log in as this test user and you go to this test page and you click on this test object, and you can hard code those things inside of your test. And then this is how you can create and manipulate testing entities in production. So you need to follow these specific predetermined guidelines. And each team has their own process in place, and each team has their own guidelines in place. But it's really important that you set these up ahead of time so that there's no confusion later on. The next step is to write your tests. So I really like using BDD, behavior-driven development. It's just super simple with Cucumber and Gherkin. It integrates really great with Robot Framework. You just have a basic give and when then. It's really easy to write, easy to read. Yeah. And then the next thing that's really important is your setup and teardown. So in your setup of the tests, you want to clear your cookies, log in with the right user that's targeted in the feature flag, and then in the test you perform the actions that you need to test, you validate whatever functionality, and then in the teardown you're going to undo any actions that you did in the test and then clean up what the test user did. So what's really important to note here is that if any step fails, you need to get alerted immediately and the test needs to stop. And then the next step is to deploy to a production canary. So what is a production canary? A production canary allows you to slowly roll out a change to a small subset of users before you roll it out to the entire population. And why would we want to use a production canary? The biggest reason is that it provides risk mitigation. So would you want 100% of your users to encounter this issue or 1%? It allows you to identify the issue, roll back to a good version, and fix the issue in a controlled environment. And just to note, infrastructure and configuration changes should always be released with a canary just due to their sensitivity. And in the split UI, you can see that canary setup is super easy. You just have this lever and you can move it to whatever percentage you want to allocate traffic to. And then as you increase your confidence, you can slowly move this to 100%. So what if there's an issue with your canary code? The first thing you need to do is just stay calm. Ask yourself if it's okay if your users see this. If yes, keep the canary as is and just fix the bug. If not, then return the canary to 0% traffic, fix the bug, and then redeploy. Okay, so just to summarize for risk mitigation, before launch, use feature flags to target users, and after launch, use production canaries to limit your audience. So the outcome of this process was really amazing. So our entire team, from engineering to product to design, everyone had higher confidence in our releases because we already knew that our features were working in production. We also had an increased developer velocity. So our developers would spend more time creating value and working on new improvements and new features for our users and less time fixing bugs and defects. So testing in production promotes a very proactive engineering culture. So I don't want to wait until something breaks, have a user report it to me, go investigate what's happening, and then fix it. I want to know what's happening and fix it before my user ever sees anything wrong. And then the long-term effects of this, again, was that it minimized our user interaction with bugs and defects, and it ensured a really great user experience. And then just a note on performance testing in production. I know this question comes up a lot. Yes, it's possible. You want to do it at a time with low traffic and be prepared for outages, because it's better to do this on purpose and control the outcome rather than have it happen to you unexpectedly where you have a high load and all of your servers crash because you weren't prepared. So when handling third parties, what's worked best for me is to have a header in the API request that you send to the third party, and then work with the third party and tell them, hey, any request that you get with this header is coming from a test, so I want you to handle it like this, or do this action when you get that request from this test. I've done this a few times and I've never had a problem with my third party integrations, so you just have to tell them what to do. And then what if you absolutely cannot test in prod? So there's a lot of people who come to me and they say, Talia, I love this idea, but I just can't test in prod. For those people, I say you can spin up a containerized environment per build. So you can use Docker to spin up your microservices, but just remember, the more dependencies, the more complicated it will be. So just some notes if you decide to take this approach. You need to know which version of Docker will be used in production and test against those versions. You also need to run separate tests for each individual microservice as well as all of them together. And it's also not the most secure place to run your tests because hackers are continuously targeting these systems because they're really just not secured properly. And also it's super expensive. So think of all the number of times that these environments will have to be spun up every time your developers will push up new code on each commit. It just adds up. It's super expensive. So testing with a containerized environment is still good. It's just not as good. And what about other non-production tests? So staging environments can still be used for pre-production testing, and I'm going to go through that in a minute. The staging environment can still be used for financial systems that abide by SOX compliance and privacy-related efforts that need to have data breaches. So what about other non-production tests? So staging environments can still be used for pre-production testing. This is really important for financial systems that abide by SOX compliance. Certain things need to be tested ahead of time and just can't be tested in production. These are things like privacy-related efforts and things that are data sensitive. So when you look at all of your tests, within the basic suite of tests, you have your end-to-end flows, and then within the end-to-end flows, you have your production tests. So there are end-to-end flows that are not run in production, and this is due to that data sensitivity or privacy sensitivity. Each product is going to have this operation be a little bit different, but for the most part, you should have end-to-end tests that are run in production. Okay, so let's talk about shifting your company's testing culture. So if this is something that you're interested in, hopefully I've convinced you. There's a few steps that you can take now that will help you convince your company. The first thing is you want to explain why the pros outweigh the cons. So is your staging environment unreliable? Yes, it is. Are there frequently issues that could have been caught if you were testing in production? Yes. Use examples from the past. So do you remember when we merged XYZ and it caused this issue in production? Use examples that prove your point. And then you're going to want to propose a path forward. You can't just go to management with problems, you have to go to them with solutions. So have you heard about this thing called feature flagging? Can we try it in our next sprint? I know Split has a free version of feature flagging that you can start using right away. So that's an option. So we used to be scared of deploying new features, and we used to have debates of whether or not to deploy code on Fridays. Now we don't fight about whether or not to deploy code on Fridays. We fight about other things. And then once we started moving more and more things to testing and production, these discussions and this fear just stopped. Because the lead time to know if something was wrong was reduced, and again, the confidence in our releases increased. So there's always going to be those people who say that testing in production will never work. And to those people, I say three things. Number one, staging will never fully represent production. Number two, staging is a sunk cost. And number three, these people are not my target audience. They'll either get on board or die off. So if testing in production is something that you want to try, these are the steps of how to get there. The first is to install the necessary tools. So your feature flagging, your automation framework, your job scheduler, and your alerting tool. And then create your test data and make sure your test entities only interact with each other. And then write your tests and make sure your teardown cleans up your test. Launch behind a feature flag, deploy to your production canary, and have a drink. So in case you haven't paying attention So in case you haven't been paying attention at all the last 25 minutes, I just want you to take away 2 things from this talk. The first is that no one cares if your feature is working in staging, we care if it's working in production. The second is that the only way to know if it's working in production is to test it in production. Alright, thanks guys. Thanks for listening. This is my Twitter handle and my email address in case you guys have questions. And have a great rest of your day. I hope you enjoyed it.